Well, welcome everybody. You're hearing the voice of Cindy Gordon. I'm the CEO of SalesChoice, and I'm here today with Debbie McGrath and also Cathy Cobey, who runs the global practice of Ernst & Young's trusted AI practice. Debbie and I have been partners in putting this program together now. This is, I think, our fourth session, and she'll say a few words about hr.com in a couple minutes. I'm not going to dwell too much on myself. The whole objective of this series, it started off really around bringing great friends together earlier in COVID and to really talk about diversity, inclusiveness, and collaboration. And one of the outcomes of the first session was we really need to invite all your male friends, Cindy. So we broadened it out and we send the invitations out. And it's just been growing. People just come if they choose. There's no pressure. It's really been around learning more than anything. Debbie helps me with the Zooming. Thanks to her, we've got the platform. So Debbie, again, thank you for supporting us on this. In terms of the agenda, this is a little bit different than some other sessions. We've decided to really focus in on artificial intelligence today and really zoom in on just some baseline constructs. So to make sure that everybody's grounded, at least in the way I view AI and how I've come to appreciate what it's good at, what its value is, what it's not good at. But under that current of decisions, it's very important that we as leaders understand the ethical side of AI and also the risks to women, in particular in terms of some of the diversity and data bias issues. Rather than moving us ahead, it could in fact move us back. And it's going to take a lot of leadership to ask the right questions on inspecting the data and the patterns and increasing our statistical knowledge and relevance. AI is only good as the data that you feed it. It's not necessarily always selective on the data that you feed it. It just wants more and more. We've had the sessions in the past. There's a lot of great content. So if you haven't been to the resource section, I encourage you to go there. You know, Roger Love did a session last session, and he's the #1 voice coach in the world. And I think, you know, just hearing him, there's a lot of materials he has on his sites. He's in LA. And, you know, one of the things that I've appreciated, you think about all the university training, all the business training, you know, how often did we as executives talk about the greatest instrument is our voice? And how often did we teach people to pause and hold a moment? So it's really important that, you know, I think as we look forward to building the skills of our next generation, our children in particular, that we recognize that. Natika Washington did an incredible session. If you haven't heard her tell her story on overcoming the challenges in the military and I'd call it the verbal abuse and sexual abuse she encountered, and she's moved on into some of the most senior roles in the US government on diversity, inclusiveness, and her confidence in how she coaches women to stand up and not to be afraid to speak the truth. Dr. Margie Warwell and I sit on the Forbes advisory board, and she's got a number of books on having courage and daring to be brave. Siobhan Thatcher is just an inspirational speaker. She's the head of digital enablement, a large global company, RingCentral. Actually, the team at Zoom all broke away from RingCentral and formed Zoom, but RingCentral is probably one of the larger footprints in infrastructure in large corporate environments for collaboration. If you're not familiar with Debbie Rosati, Deborah is the founder and CEO of Women on Get On Board. If you want to get on board as a director, she has a great not-for-profit organization, or actually maybe for-profit, I think about it. I'm a member, but it does connect you in the sense of all of the board director roles that are going on across the country. She has learning sessions as well, so a great foundation there. And Dr. Wendy Kirtier and Erin, her colleague, is here on the call today. Their incredible world-class research on diversity, the toolkits, the training, the leadership they're showing. And if you know Wendy and the team, they're over at Ryerson University. We were also joined by Gary Wood in the past, who's a serial CEO. He's run a number of large enterprises. He's now a principal at the Osborne Group. And of course, Heather Tulk, who's originally from the Maritime Senior Executive Bell Canada, now working in sort of the biotech and industry. And I think I spelled solutions wrong there, so sorry there, Heather. But all that content you can find here, and I encourage you, there's just some great content If I had to spot check sessions, I definitely would try and hear Natika's story on diversity and inclusiveness. It was very moving and very sad at the same time. The only thing I'm going to say here about me, just to point out, is there's a new book out. If you haven't read it, I really encourage you to get it. It's really a great read. It was 3 years of research. Every industry that we could think of, we profiled on AI and the applications. But the best part of it was thinking about the before and after. Cathy was actually one of the reviewers, one of our speakers today. But I just recommend that if you really want to get more depth here in applications, kind of get caught up on some of the different regulatory frameworks, it's pretty current. It came out, I think, in March, if I recall, of this year. So in terms of the ethical side of AI, my company has been very vocal on this. A lot of our recognition has come from our foundations and principles of our audit infrastructure and how we approach AI to really ensure that the models, in fact, are very grounded. The inspiration on the series, and then we're going to get under with our formal topics, was really around 5 principles. Wanted to connect leaders so you could grow and think deeper, and I underscore the think deeper. We so often don't give the time for deeper and quality dialogues, and obviously the intrigue and the discovery can come from those, those pauses in life, and also connecting, so many different diverse perspectives. I think the other thing I've been very vocal about, certainly in the last, maybe last 3 to 4 years, is just the recognition that each human being is so precious, and to really motivate, let leaders, executive board directors, to really recognize that each person has a story, and if they're not treated well and respected, those stories continue, and it impacts not your brand, it impacts their souls. Life's far too short. So, I guess I'm really wearing my hat on that the world needs a whole lot more love and patience. And in order for that, you certainly need to be far braver and have more courage to, to constantly forge new pathways. And as Debbie likes to say, we want to maximize your human potential. I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Debbie McGrath. I've known Debbie for many years. She's an inspiration. She's a go-getter. If you're not a member of her community, your HR executives, you're really missing out on just world-class leadership. Debbie, over to you.
I think, Cindy, our partnership is basically you use my Zoom room because it's a big room, but I appreciate the support of all the entrepreneurs and females in this audience, and always find your topics really encouraging and thoughtful. So
great. Thanks, Debbie. Did you want to cover off some of the tips, Debbie, in terms of Zoom?
Yeah, just in case anybody's never been on a Zoom room before, but we do ask that you mute yourself when you're not talking, and use the chat to ask questions, or the chat or the question mark, but the chat is probably easier because it's a smaller room. Sometimes we do break into networking groups, but we're not going to do it today. So I'm pretty sure you guys are all experts at Zoom by now. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Just like to also note, before we get under with the formal comments and introduce Cathy Cobey as well, to note that December 16th, we'll be having a session. I haven't worked through the topics, but we'll try and get that out to everybody, shortly. So just to set the stage, I'm going to define AI. I've got a few perspectives, and then I'm going to turn over to Cathy. We're going to take a deep dive into AI and ethics. At the end of my session, I will definitely open it up for Q&A. We decided not to move people into rooms today, just so we could have different voices of questions. And then we'll move on to on to Cathy, and then we'll also have some additional time for Q&A. I don't think there's anybody on the call that probably hasn't been exposed to many of the constructs that are going on, but there really is some dynamics underfoot that either could create, in my view, a perfect world or a perfect storm. You can get one perspective that's extremely skeptical in the implications of the bionic age and moving towards merging man and machine, and is that the kind of world we want to create? From other perspectives that have really forewarned what we've unleashed, and that we do not have the legislative constructs or the regulatory frameworks, although they're coming together quite quickly. But that aside, we don't have maybe the vehicles in place to be able to inspect and audit and the governance practices. Most of the CEOs that I've been exposed to across the country, maybe we've trained, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred, maybe more, and also within different discussions. When we usually ask them key questions to define some of these concepts, they do look a little bit puzzled. They'll have some verbiage, but they're not very deep. And in this particular case, my thesis is that AI knowledge as we advance is going to be as important as understanding a P&L. And so we really do have, I think, an accountability to ensure that our leaders are ready. You've probably seen this slide in the past, but it does put things in perspective in terms of the quantum shift in terms of the industry, where you can see the impact of the personal computer and just the speed. We're into this dynamic now where the trajectory of bringing so many of these dynamics together is just unprecedented. We've never in our history as a human race have had this much engineering enablement into our infrastructure. And coming up, and as we advance, is the whole quantum computing enablement, which is going to even further fuel where we're at. So it's a cycle that's unprecedented. And like I said, I think it could be a perfect world, or I think it could be a perfect storm. The basics in terms of definitions, first of all, the term AI, really simply, it's not a new term, it's been around for a long time, but it essentially, it just tries the ability to learn and reason like humans. I mean, it's just a large umbrella. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of methods in AI. So hiring one particular AI person, you have to get into the use cases and the different types of methods and the algorithms to solve different use cases. And I think as I share some of the stories here, I think it's really important that you understand how complex this world can be in setting up organizational structures if you don't have a large enough budget to do the talent mix that's required to do this well. Otherwise, it's almost best to bring in experts or outsource enablements. The machine learning is simply the actual computational aspects of the algorithms and their mathematical formulas. Most of them, you know, a lot of these methods have already been invented. They're not new. Some of them were all out in the 1980s, and they just weren't able to be used effectively because we didn't have the horsepower in the cloud computing. And you will hear the term deep learning thrown around, and that's just another, you know, AI method, which starts moving into concepts like neural networks, where you start to get layers upon layers of patterns that you can decompose and gain insights, particularly when you've got diverse data sets of text and images and video, voice, etc. There's many research perspectives on why organizations are advancing in AI, and I know this may sound a little bit motherhood, but I think the organizations that are really focusing, they're going in pretty deep and broad. They're looking at their entire business models of how they can create a competitive advantage using AI and building the infrastructure below the, you know, the surface so they can actually capture things. So many of the companies are, you know, everybody's still working on their massive data lakes so they can easily access and connect the different data sources. Certainly, we've seen tremendous growth in leadership within the banking community, I'd say in particular. Telecommunications is also another, you know, major innovator, I would say, if you look at all of the financial dollars that are moving. And obviously, you've got all of the newer players that are coming out with an AI first kind of positioning on how they're using the data. In terms of the global views, just to highlight a couple of points, you know, we would have seen a few years ago where there was definitely interest. Now we've got large scale movement where pretty well all large multinationals absolutely have AI initiatives underway at different scales. The piece that people are still struggling with, and Debbie, Cathy, you and I can talk about that a little bit more, is the last mile. It's the sustainability and driving the continual feeding of fueling of these models. It's not like other software programs. People often do not understand that an AI model can drift. In other words, it can statistically, you know, start to move in directions that really start to predict things that aren't as strong as they may have had initially, because the data that's coming in is already undergoing a pattern. So they do need ongoing review, ongoing monitoring. Takes experts. So when you move into this cycle, it's not for the short term, it's definitely for the long term. And you have to be patient as well. Thought I'd tell a few stories, then I'll open it for questions, just 4 quick ones. When I was over in Asia, I had the pleasure of going in Korea, South Korea, to visit the Samsung Innovation Center. And what was interesting about it is that they brought so many of the patterns of the fully intelligent, super hyper personalized home, so that it wasn't just, your Nest, if you've got a Nest in your home, or, ability to speak to Google or Alexa. It was everything had a sensor control and could all be navigated by my cell phone and even my car. I could speak commands to my car, and it could invoke that I was getting close to home. It would turn the lights on. So we are moving in, and a lot of these kinds of home constructs we don't have fully deployed, but it gives you a sense of what's coming and some of the investments that we could all be making in terms of purchasing some of the different products. It's just, to me, kind of an exciting aspect of where AI can have the intelligence of all of the dynamics of all of the instrumentation in my home. I've been following the cobot and robot space for about the last 4 years. Another day I can share a little bit more about some of the insights, but I've been really listening and reading as much as I can on cobots, because I'm quite fascinated of where this next generation is going to start being mobilized. This is just an example of a robot that's in Germany. You can order this online. The manufacturer is Fraunhofer in Germany. And it's a robot that can serve you wine. It can also have all your recipes. It can play you any of the songs. They're working on facial recognition. So if you look sad, they might be able to alter their voice. So all these kinds of dynamics, there's lots and lots of researchers in the domain called affective computing, which is bringing the emotional experience of people and machine closer together, where to the point you might not know what the difference is because of the evolution and the design of manufacturing robots that will look just like you if you so choose, which is a whole other aspect of sets. Another company that I've been following for quite a while is the China Construction Bank. They actually opened in 2018, and their philosophy is that we would remove all of our staff. We would move in. The only people that would be serviced with a human would be with someone with a net worth well over $1 million. And so they've been moving all of these smart machines and bots all through 1,600 locations in China. And so if you're interested in the banking and the finance sector, you have to really be following what the China Construction Bank is doing. People can just go into the bank, wave their to get in, because there's a digital facial footprint, and you're greeted at the door. All of your transactions are conducted electronically, but it does give you a sense of some of the things that other countries are pioneering. I don't think we have such a bank anywhere in North America at this time. Probably the latest announcement, and I know that Krista Jones is on the call and very interested in AI and e-learning and education, is Little Sophia. Little Sophia, you've all probably seen Big Sophia that came out from Hanson Robotics, where she was also given more rights than any other female in Saudi Arabia. And so she's the mother of Little Sophia. Little Sophia is, you can pre-order her now. Her whole positioning is around STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And what she will be doing is providing educational support. She's a cute little bot. She's not very big. I've placed an order. She's not very expensive. I think she's running it around, I think it's $250, and then you have a monthly fee on top of that, US. But I think a way of appreciating where some of these dynamics are going to go for our little one, as we increasingly see more support of cobots move into the educational system. And certainly with COVID, the acceleration of this industry, the e-learning industry and people that have been building collaborative platforms have been really, really growing significantly. One more quick story, and I'm just going to talk briefly about SalesChoice, trying to bring the theme a little bit more into the ethical domain of why we've worked hard in our software. What we do is we predict futures. So we analyze Salesforce data sets and we predict wins and losses. Our whole philosophy is around how to end revenue uncertainty and bring in other data sets. And we can get to levels in some of our accounts. We're at 95% predictions at the top of the pipeline on every transaction, whether you win or lose. Now, obviously, those are large data sets. Some of the smaller clients that we have are mid-market, might be around 83 or 84. But the point being is that you can channel which opportunities are best, which have the higher odds of being converted, especially when you've got large data sets. There's a lot of historical intelligence that you can apply. So we made a decision that we would always audit in real time what the AI algorithm says versus what the outcome was and make it very visible. We also ensure that all of our clients can validate the models and understand the attributes that are in the model. So we've worked very hard to ensure that that kind of perspective, and most recently we were just recognized as one of the top 20 technology companies in Canada to watch. I look forward when it says worldwide, but Canada is a great ecosystem, to be playing in. So I'd like to just pause. If you've got any basic questions on AI, be happy to try and answer them. Then I want to introduce Cathy, who will start moving us into deeper aspects of governance, responsibility, reflection, and some frameworks that I think can also help you really look at what it takes to put the kind of the muscle into an organization to lead effectively. Any questions?
I have a question, Cindy, and it really has to do with AI, but my problem is I've been watching AI just kind of advance and it's amazing, but I also know what a pain in the butt it is actually to collect the data, work with the data, and move it forward. So do you have an idea of, is it getting easier to do that? Is it because I'm just thinking about how the collection of data and how arduous it is.
Yeah, well, it depends on the use case, right? So if you, for example, in our case, right, the data is in Salesforce, right? So we already have a conduit of data to be able to analyze, right? So we don't have to collect or label, it's already pre-labeled because it's into specific field classifications in the workflow software, right? But to your point, like what do they say now? It's still about 70 to 80% of the budget is to go to the data assembly, the data labeling. I can talk about one account because they're just very generous of allowing us to talk about them. A very large $2 billion company. They have multiple AI initiatives going on. One is in their call center, but they can access all the data because it's there. So they're just applying some IBM sentiment mining, positive or negative kind of dynamics. But on their mainstream, where they got their data distributed in 4 different major centers, right? Large SAP infrastructure, CRM infrastructure, host of third parties. They're building a large data lake, right? And it's big, and they're working with Amazon. So they're moving it all into a central repository. Data lakes aren't new. We used to always call them central warehouses. Some of the language, just get changes, right, from a central warehouse to a data lake. But yeah, the data labeling and the cleansing and is a big issue. People have to start investing in new operational infrastructure. There's a whole category called machine learning operations, Valerie, which has the connectors to be able to suck data from different pipes, move it, but then you can go into your dynamic modeling. So that's been exciting, and that's moving the industry well ahead in terms of the enablement. We just keep underestimating, to your point, how crappy the job is of labeling and giving the I'd call it the team, the assembly team, the time to do it right. You know, in the data lineage and the documentation, and people just don't, they get impatient. It's not hard to take a data set and spin up an AI model, right? But to drive a sustainable enterprise business process that's credible, thoughtful, you know, applies risk principles. It's hard work. Yeah. Cathy, you want to build on that?
Yeah, like AI has a lot of opportunities open to us, but I would say that it's a technology that will affect us and our lives like the wheel did, electricity, steam engines, computers, whereas it will take, you know, at least a generation, or if not two, to get to that, you know, its full impact. But it's going to be transformational in regards to how we will be living. You know, my daughters are 23. By the time they're 80, they're going to be affected by AI in everything that they do. And they won't fear it as we do now. It'll have progressed to that point. I think the issue today is that AI is what we consider narrow AI, and it is designed for just certain functions, and it doesn't have the general intelligence that we as humans have. And so we're asking it to do very specific functions, giving it some autonomy or some, you know, expanded boundaries in order to not be kind of so rules-based in how it operates. But without that general intelligence, it is going to falter. It is going to make mistakes. It is, as Cindy opened with, it does going to drift. It's going to, as the world around it evolves, if it doesn't evolve with it, it's going to become less and less effective. And so if you're not monitoring for that, if you're not managing for that, if you're not continually updating it and refreshing it for its environment, it's going to become less and less effective. And all of these purported failures, which to me, I kind of try and phrase it like we should all be expecting that AI is going to have these types of failures. It's by the nature of the system. We then would have a better opportunity to take advantage of the benefits that it has, because it does allow for more personalized experiences like that. The education, for example, like just imagine the opportunity to now provide those machines into a lot of rural countries, rural areas or developing countries where education and access to really high education teachers and materials, it can be better provided with that kind of machine. Just how that's going to elevate all of society. And so sometimes I think we here in the developed countries don't always appreciate just how much this technology can be an equalizer if we design it correctly. But it is very high maintenance, and it is just at the very tip of its journey. There is still, as much as it seems very technically complex now, it's actually, I think it's kind of just on its the periphery of what it'll accomplish over the next century.